The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, my name is Lyle Bunn, and welcome to this seventh module in the seven-part series of education targeting integrators and resellers. Your decision to add digital signage or to expand digital signage in your offering is very important one, and I'm especially excited to be presenting this module. It's the seventh, the final module of this seven-part series. If you've had the advantage of reviewing previous modules already, you'll really enjoy our moving into the area of content, as it presents a significant opportunity account service. We will be referring back to previous modules, but generally what I want to do is really focus on the business opportunity and the service opportunity that is inherent in the content element of digital signage. What is the content? The content is the media that's presented on the flat panel display or provided in interactivity in a session, and it's content that really delivers the value of digital signage. So we're going to focus on three areas: why content, the points of content service, and there are many of them, and thirdly, ways of activating the revenue that's available. What I'll be sharing with you are the best practices that have been realized across the industry over more than my 14 years of experience. Every end user focuses on content, but here's what we found. We've generally found that integrators and providers of technology tend to focus on that element and leave the content to their customer, leave the content to the end user. The result of that too often is insufficient focus and emphasis placed on the content, and therein underperformance or even failure of the network. It is a reality that poor content delivers poor results, and if you're in the business of delivering maximum value for what it is you provide to end users, you're really going to enjoy this session. So you'll already probably be familiar with this simple construct, and that is that the digital signage proceeds based on business objectives being identified and articulated. Then the content, the messaging that would be required to produce those results is identified. And then thirdly, the technology required to present the content which achieves the results is put in place. The objectives and the content really are a very symbiotic element of this three-point move forward plan. And what many organizations find is that as their objectives are refined or achieved, their perspective on the kind of content that they might present gets dramatically refined as well. And so objectives might start off by, for example, the desire to generate sales lift on a product. And as content is presented, it becomes clear that the content could be better targeted to one demographic group over another. And so content is defined based on the target audience and the day part when they might be looking, the time frame when they might be looking at that display. As a result of this, it affects the way that the objectives are identified within a demographic, within a time frame, and this produces a developmental loop related to the refinement of objectives and the refinement of content. As the integrator, your role will have been, will always be to assure that the technology that's being provided is suitable to the dynamic around the content and the dynamic around the objectives that are being set. Those objectives, and let's remind ourselves of these, because these identify the kind of content that you could become involved in assuring can be carried on the solution that you're providing. So as we look at this, as we did in a previous module, let me draw your attention again to that objective of revenue achievement, which is the primary use of digital signage. Revenue is achieved in multiple ways with different kinds of messaging, targeting different viewer demographics, and targeting that demographic with a message that's suitable to the time of the year, the season, the month, the week, even the time of day when they're going to be looking at the digital signage, which will hopefully influence their decisions about how they act, how they buy afterwards. So content is really the central element of digital signage. Many would say that digital signage has been stalled in its development despite it being over 20% compound annual growth rate. Many would suggest that the application of digital signage has been stalled because of the lack of emphasis on content and the content element. So here's what I'd like to propose to you. And I've been, by the way, very excited in presentations to integrators when the questions really relate to content and how integrators can move into providing content. Here's the point that I would make about content, and that is if 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 it's on the plate of the end user organization, it should be on your plate, not um, perhaps not directly in providing content, but by at least being able to introduce content creation capability, perhaps through partner or referral relationships to that end user organization. Content matters a great deal because it is content that ultimately delivers the result once the technology infrastructure is in place. I thought you would appreciate seeing the elements of content, and these individual elements are what must be considered by that end user as they're contemplating the nature of the content and the messaging that will be presented to those whom they wish to influence. So the zone layout, this is the breaking down of the display panel into multiple areas in which different kinds of content are presented. There could be a main viewing window showing video with a tower off to the right that has a scrolling of information or different areas where different types of information are presented, and maybe even a scroll across the bottom. There could be any number of configurations of the zone layout. Within the playout of information, there's a playlist structure, and often the structure relates to the kinds of information, the kinds of messaging that are going to be presented. Branding versus merchandising versus infotainment, etc., etc. There is an assessment structure that has been developed that works very well. And that assessment structure really focuses on the effectiveness of the content in terms of branding, merchandising, ambience, and vitality. BMAV, branding, merchandising, ambience, and vitality. There's usually the requirement for a style guide because content is often being welcomed, invited, or provided by different parts of the organization. And so the style guide is the governing principles around the nature of the content and its composition that will be presented. There are other elements that are part of that content management, content strategy, content tactical decision along the way. So I won't go into these in detail, but we can come back to these with Q&A, and I'll show you how to do that at the end of the session. There will be different types of content, from still images to animated messages, both of which will be in a range of formats. You will have considered this range of formats as source content when you recommended the content management software that was going to be used. you can see in all of these different types of content, from rolls and scrolls and video and data feeds, and even interface with applications within the enterprise, that there's a very, very wide range of sources of content that might be applied. I'll use the word spots as I'm moving forward. And so a play loop is comprised of individual content spots. Moving forward, I'll use this example. This is an example from Durham region in Carolina. And what it illustrates is the wide range of the number of zones that could exist on a display. And what you can see here are feeds in terms of a Doppler radar, uh, animations of feed as presented by the forecast. There's video being shown. There's still information on the display. And so this is an example where there's a long viewing time, a long dwell time by the commuters on this bus. Therefore, a wider range of content can reasonably be provided to them because they've got a long dwell time. Think of this being the case even in a doctor's office, for example, where the average wait time might be 20 minutes. It's possible to put a lot of zones and even a lot of content within each of those zones. What I like about this example from Durham is that on this bus, the video in that central window is going to change regularly, and the area around it provides promotional capability and information in terms of weather and anticipated weather changes. So here's an example of lots of zones, and you can imagine how deep the playlists would go based on the average commuter ride. So let's do this. Let's talk about the points of content service. Content goes through this cycle. I'm sorry for presenting a chart on this, but this graphic, I think, illustrates the work to be done in terms of starting with zone layout and play loop design. These are going to relate to the average dwell time of the viewer that's going to be in front of that display. And what you ideally want in content is for the content loop to equal the average dwell time of the viewer. It's okay if viewers see that same loop a couple of times, but generally you're looking to maximize the eyeballs on the awareness time, the viewer dwell time. Once the play loop design and zone layout have been identified, sources of media assets will be identified, and some new content spots will even be created. When you're looking at this graphic, you're probably contemplating the contributions that you might be making to the end user organization as they define their content strategy, their tactics, and the composition of those content spots. The play loops have to be managed as new spots are added and old ones would be deleted off outside of an automatic deletion or no play capability. And lastly, there will be an impact assessment conducted to determine which content spots are most effective in the interest of optimizing the investment that that end user has made. So between the previous list of about 15 different service elements that were identified and this graphic representing the 6 major areas of, of activity related to digital signage content, you get the sense of the service areas that you might provide. And as has been reflected in the first and second modules of this series, content is an ongoing requirement. And we've generally seen that it's poor content and not underperforming technology that has retarded the growth and stalled the success and undermined the success of digital signage. And so as you are going about your day, you will see digital signage in action, and you'll be able to develop an assessment of whether or not you can provide content-related services to that network operator that can allow them to achieve a higher return on investment from the network. So content is not like technology in the way that technology is initially applied and then operated. Content is a recurring investment, an ongoing investment in achieving the results from the network. I'd mentioned briefly the framework for assessing the quality of content. And this is a simple construct that will be very useful to you. With a piece of paper, score on a score of 1 to 10, where 1 is poor and 10 is very good, how any piece of content measures up against the requirements that would be asked of it. So as you're looking at a digital menu board, for example, imagine the degree to which the quality of the branding is delivered by the content on that digital menu board. Score it on the basis of how influential it might be in activating you to order or to buy certain products. That's the merchandising, the influence element. Ask yourself how it fits into the environment, how that content amplifies the environment and reinforces what that brand is trying to deliver in that environment. And also assess on that score from 1 to 10 the level of vitality that is delivered and how optimal that level of energy or vitality is coming off the content spots on that digital menu board. You'll end up with a score that's somewhere between 4 and 40, I suspect. And what will not be surprising to you is that as often as you would do this assessment, you would come up with a score that is suboptimal. In other words, there's a lot of very, very poor content being delivered on digital signage, and that is an opinion very widely shared within the digital signage community. The other point I would make about content is this. When marketers think about the paid, owned, earned media model, they're aware of paying for content to get for content presentation on radio and TV and cable and print, on billboards, etc. They're also aware of the amount of commentary that's being provided that amplifies their brand in ways that they are proud of it being amplified. Happy customers, for example, with positive comments. They're also aware of the amount of investment that they're making in content for websites and mobile commerce, in newsletters, in emails, etc. So I'd introduce this point of transmedia, and that is that content that is used in other devices, on other devices within the enterprise, can be applied to digital signage. So by modifying even a static poster to provide animation to its visual or its text elements, that modified poster composition can be applied to digital signage and can be quite powerful when that is done. So in thinking about content, you'll be bringing perspectives about transmedia and the way that media created originally for use on a different device could be used for digital signage. At the same time, you'll be encouraging the end user to trial content on their digital signage, which might be developed further and applied to other paid or earned or owned media. So this point of transmedia is a term used to describe the cost efficiencies that come with repurposing media across multiple communication devices. And hey, let me point your attention to this little word up between paid and owned. It's partnered. increasingly we see organizations wanting to amplify the brands and profile the organizations with which they are partnered. So an excellent example of this would be a digital menu board which carries images or promotional materials from a provider of their soda product, for example, where we would see Coca-Cola or Pepsi or others presented as a brand on the digital signage of that quick serve restaurant, for example. In retail, we might see a fashion brand such as Levi's being profiled on the display of that in-store digital signage. The same could be true of Nike or any athletic wear provider. And so you get the point that that content can also come from partners who are stakeholders in the success of that customer experience on that location. So activating the revenue really, I would suggest takes four forms. And that is, first of all, your determination of where the source of this content service is going to come from. Are you going to develop this capability internally? Might you go to your web development firm? Might you go to static sign providers who are working in your area, firms that you can trust to introduce to your clients? Therein being a point of supply based on the sourcing that you do behind the scenes. Next is that you'll want to define your pricing levels, your billing levels, and what you're actually going to bill for. Some integrators are billing by individual spot. Others are bundling a package where there could be, for example, 10 spots created for a monthly retainer fee. You'll want to identify if you're billing separately for content spots versus the administration of the playlist. The third point is that of using your client account management. Where digital signage is in place, I can almost assure you that there would be a high level of interest in learning about a source of content production supply that can improve the return off that digital signage investment. And so the opportunities exist not just when you're developing a new client relationship, but even where there's an installed base, and those in your organization can be involved in providing valuable required services to that existing network. The other point I would make is that you can learn fast and learn often. There is, interestingly, a lot less material available related to content than there is about the technology in the digital signage sector. But nonetheless, there are good sources of information available. Here's what I would point out in terms of content service. It's simply to be aware of the messaging that is being used by every organization out there. Being aware of static signage, for example, allows you to position your supply capability and use content as the lead-in into the discussion, where there could be audience targeting and day parting that's better served by digital signage than it is by replacing posters, in this case behind the teller's counter of this credit union. So with that, I'll welcome you to email me if you have questions about this. Do tap into the capabilities available at LG. LG Electronics has got experience in every single vertical, in every size of network you can imagine. They have lots of deep contacts within the content area. And so I would conclude with this. If you have questions about how you should move into revenue achievement and margin generation and recurring monthly revenues related to content, drop me a quick email and let's have more conversation about that. This concludes our seventh of the 7-part series. And in concluding, let me just wish you the best of success and be heads up about all of the investment areas that are involved by end users in digital signage. I wish you every success with your digital signage initiatives.